So why are so many top Democrats staying loyal to Joe Biden? And I think I have some answers. I was just reading a book about Hitler's Panzer generals during World War II, and thousands of German soldiers were shot in the last 18 months of World War II for being insufficiently loyal to the German cause. So the best way to stay alive was to portray that you were loyal. And I think just the way the world works, you will normally be much better served by emphasizing the quality of loyalty than the quality of telling the truth. So I've often told inconvenient truths over the course of my life, and it's not worked out for me socially, right? You're just going to be better served much of the time if you simply focus on being loyal, because when you're loyal, it puts you in the center of the pack. Right? If you're not loyal and you're just putting the priority on telling the truth, then you're out on the margins of the pack. So whether you're a German soldier fighting towards the end of a losing war, or you have a job, or you belong to a church or a synagogue, all right, you're generally going to be better off putting much higher priority on loyalty than on telling inconvenient truths. And so Democratic officials, Democratic leaders, they knew that overwhelmingly Joe Biden choosing to run for a second term was highly unpopular with people. But there were no incentives for them to make that case, right? All the incentives were to go along with the team. And apparently Jill Biden really likes the trappings of power. The Biden family likes the trappings of power. And to whom is Joe Biden looking for advice? Dr. Jill Biden, PhD in education. Right, she's now on the latest issue of Vogue on the cover. Right, she loves the trappings of power. And from his crack addict son Hunter, right, that's who Joe Biden is turning to for advice. And pretty much everyone else in the Democratic Party who's important has just gotten in line, because the incentives for getting in line outweigh the incentives for telling inconvenient truths. So, apparently Joe Biden is going to give a live press conference. He's going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling, and I thought he would release a recorded speech. All right, and remember, he tends to perform between 10 a.m. Eastern Time and 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So this is 3 hours outside of his time slot. So he's going to try to portray that he's up to the task of being president of the United States, and he's obviously not up to the task. But even in the face of obvious truths, all right, you're still going to have incentives to tell lies instead of telling the truth. And that's the situation that the Democrats find them in. Now, there are things that you can do for your voice quality when you have a cold, right? There are techniques, but nothing's going to overcome if you're simply tired and weak, right? As long as you are weak, right? As long as you're tired, as long as you don't have strength, that's going to radiate through your voice. Yeah, what a powerful intoxicant power is. No one wants to be the last man clapping. Yeah, just socially, you'll be much more effective in life if you put a priority on loyalty and identifying with your group as opposed to telling inconvenient truths, right? Overwhelmingly, the reward for telling inconvenient truths is considerably diminished compared to the price. And so Joe Biden's going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling that came out giving the president limited immunity, right? Immunity for actions that he carries out in public, and the presumption of immunity, right, for actions where it's not clear whether it's a public or a private act. And Donald Trump is by no means off the hook for January 6th and related charges. Let's tune into Fox News.
President Biden will walk down and deliver these remarks. We're told they'll be fairly short, and this is in direct response to the Supreme Court.
So his doctor in 2021 noted how much shorter his stride had gotten and prescribed him orthotics instead of prescribing him the Alexander technique, where he could get to the bottom of the layers of unnecessary tension that are wrapping this guy in a straitjacket. When you see Joe Biden, all right, you're seeing a guy who's just wrapped up in
President
a
Biden
straitjacket.
that go along the dissenting.
And his habits that he's developed just get tighter and tighter. and now he can't fight his way out. And it's true for many people. All right, we tend to become victims of our own habits, and we develop these habits out of reaction to two primary pressures. One, the out letting go of everything that you think you know, right? When you simply let go of thinking, when you let go of your best laid plans, right? When you let go of your strategies, when you let go of everything that you're really sure of. Okay, here's Joe Biden.
Should he be sued for illegal immigration, for Afghanistan, for something else? Here's the President of the United States.
The presidency is the most powerful office in the world. It's an office that not only tests your judgment,
much stronger voice.
Perhaps even more importantly, it's an office that can test your character.
Looks better.
Because you not only face moments when you need the courage to exercise the full power of the presidency, you also face moments where you need the wisdom to respect the limits of the power of the office of the presidency. This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law. Not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the President alone. This decision today has continued the court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away women's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation. Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking at the Capitol, a mob literally hunting down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, gallows erected to hang the Vice President, Mike Pence. I think it's fair to say it's one of the darkest days in the history of America. Now the man who sent that mob to the U.S. Capitol is facing potential criminal conviction for what happened that day. And the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts before the upcoming election. The public has a right to know the answer about what happened on January 6th before they asked to vote again this year. Now, because of today's decision, that is highly, highly unlikely. It's a terrible disservice to the people of this nation. So now the American people have to do what the courts should have been willing to do, but will not. The American people have to render a judgment about Donald Trump's behavior. The American people must decide whether Donald Trump's assault on our democracy on January 6th makes him unfit for public office in the highest office in the land. The American people must decide if Trump's embrace of violence to preserve his power is acceptable. Perhaps most importantly, the American people must decide if they want to entrust the president once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it. You know, at the outset of our nation, it was the character of George Washington, our first president, to define the presidency. He believed power was limited, not absolute, and that power always resides with the people, always. Now, over 200 years later, with today's Supreme Court decision, once again, it'll depend on the character of the men and women who hold that presidency that are going to define the limits of the power of the presidency, because the law will no longer do it. I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years, but any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent. May God bless you all, and may God help preserve our democracy. Thank you. May God protect our troops.
Yeah, well, that's going to really put to rest these concerns.
What makes you so confident you should be the president?
It's addressing this Supreme Court ruling. Let's bring in.
Yeah, he doesn't exactly put to rest concerns about his frailty. Now, he does have a much better makeup job. He does have a much stronger voice. That was a much better performance, right? Reading from a teleprompter that he gave during the debate, but doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Yeah, the wise Latina, Sonia Sotomayor, right? Another affirmative action appointee comes through for us. So, yeah, I think loyalty was a big part of the reason that so many liberals continue to support Joe Biden, even when it was obvious that the American people did not want him to run, right? Overwhelming evidence in the polls, the American people did not want him to run. But there's something else that's operating here, and that is the liberal left hero system, which believes in the moral truth of categories such as ageism. And I think far fewer Republicans believe that there is such a moral sin as ageism. But people on the left, particularly in elite circles, do believe that there's such a sin as ageism, along with racism and sexism. Now, what happens in nature? What happens in reality? In reality, different groups have different gifts. Men have different gifts from women. Women have different gifts from men. And as people age, right, there is a decline in their physical and mental stamina. And sometimes they can develop wisdom, but you would recognize ageism, sexism, racism as just part of reality, right? And so if you don't buy into the liberal left zeitgeist, you would have much less problem saying Joe Biden is simply unfit to be president, and there's no such moral category as ageism. There's no such moral category as racism or sexism or imperialism or colonialism. Right now, there are tremendous blind spots in the conservative heroes system as well. Conservatives in the United States tend to deny the truth of evolution. Right? They tend to deny much of the scientific consensus. They may be blinded that people who share their religion are much more likely to be good people than people who don't. They may have an exaggerated sense of the moral powers of their fellow conservatives. They might think that their fellow conservatives are just going to be much more reliably moral and upstanding citizens than people on the left. Not necessarily true. So every hero system comes with downsides, right? A hero system is a system of meaning and purpose and right and wrong that we impose on reality to ward off our feelings of insignificance. And the dominant liberal paradigms with regard to ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, there's no there, right? There's no reality to them. And I think they got tripped up by believing in something that is not true, right? Among the liberal left, I mean, nobody watching this show is on the liberal left, right? You don't want to be known as ageist. You don't want to be saying things as ageist. And these bogus moral categories just clutter the thought, right? You're constructing all sorts of moral categories on reality that do not belong there. What if you build a house and you clutter up your foundations with all sorts of things that don't belong there, right? You're going to have a much less effective and possibly less safe building process. So too, when you're trying to understand the world around you, if you clutter it up with all these bogus left-wing moral categories such as racism and sexism and ageism, all right, you are going to be at a disadvantage when wrestling with parts of reality. And people on the left were clearly blinded by their hero system. I mean, the evidence was staring them in the face that Joe Biden was not capable of the the responsibilities of the office of the President of the United States. And it was brought to my attention after the Sunday show that there are things that the President of the United States needs to decide, such as a nuclear response. And there's no bureaucracy, no protocol for dealing with a nuclear attack on the United States that does not require a presidential response. So you don't want someone this decrepit as President of the United States, right? Joe Biden's been able to get away with it, and you can get away with all sorts of things until finally you just go smash into reality, right? I wonder what Victor Davis Hanson has to say. He just joined the Fox broadcast after Joe Biden gave about 4 minutes of remarks. He warmed up his voice. He had good makeup. It looked a lot better because he just got to read from a teleprompter.
Davis Hanson, now senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, one of the smartest people on the planet. Victor, you heard this. What's your take on what the president did there from the White House?
Well, it was pretty rich, because this case would have never got to the Supreme Court had his own Department of Justice not appointed a special counsel that had a history of bias and went after the leading presidential opposition candidate to the president. And it wouldn't have come to the Supreme Court had Fannie Willis not met with a White House counsel to coordinate a defense strategy in Georgia, prosecution strategy in Georgia. And it wouldn't have happened if the third highest ranking federal attorney in Merrick Garland's DOJ had not suddenly appeared at Alvin Bragg's prosecution. And so this was in response to the weaponization of the DOJ by none other than Joe Biden. Second, it's very ironic, Jason, because you see the special counsel, Robert Hur, said that Joe Biden himself, while he was president, faced criminal liability. He had classified files, which is a felony to be in his possession. He didn't notify anybody that he had them until he selected the special counsel to go after Donald Trump. And then he had a speechwriter that had no security clearance that admittedly was looking at those files in the presence of Joe Biden. The only reason he wasn't prosecuted was Robert Hur determined that he was too enfeebled and would win the sympathy of a jury. And, you know, finally, they have been going after the Supreme Court. Chuck Schumer went out to the doors of the Supreme Court and called out by name Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and said, "You're going to reap the whirlwind. You don't know what's going to hit you." And then when protesters a year later started showing up, including a potential assassin, at the homes of the justices, Merrick Garland didn't enforce the law, which was a felony to do that for political purposes to influence a Supreme Court decision. So this was very tragic what Joe Biden just did. It was ironic, it was wrong, and it was highly partisan, and it's dangerous.
I think I would agree with all of that. It is tragic because we need a Supreme Court with its independence, and the Democrats are doing everything they can to make them dependent on whatever the political whim of the party in power is, and it's just disgusting. But Democrats have run out of things to run it. They can't run on the economy. They can't run on the border. They can't run on the protecting us overseas and all these wars that are going on. The mental and physical demise of Joe Biden is on display. So they're going to pick, I guess, the Supreme Court. But a 6-3 ruling in this particular case is pretty convincing, 6-3.
Yeah, well, especially when you've seen what they've done to Donald Trump and what they'll do to him again when he's probably going to be elected. And again, the irony is that Joe Biden violated his oath of office when he destroyed the southern border and allowed 10 million people illegally to enter the United States. There's a lot of people who felt that that was a violation of the oath of office. As I said earlier, he broke the law when he had in his possession, as president, classified file.
Victor Davis Hanson, thanks so much for joining us. I want to quickly bring in Ned Ryan, founder and CEO of American Majority. Ned, what's your take on what the president said just a few minutes ago from the White House?
I saw a senile old man ranting that the left's supermajority, i.e. SCOTUS, is no longer under the control and is actually doing their fulfilling their constitutional role. I also saw a bitter old man frustrated that his prosecutors can't continue their political lawfare against his chief political opponent. Because what the SCOTUS majority said today, Jason, was just because your chief political opponent, when he was in office in his presidency, did things you didn't like, that's not a crime. And then you can't throw your political rival into prison simply because you don't like him. And in the face of that, and as a response to that, Biden said, basically made the Supreme Court a political target because he deeply resented that the judicial branch stood up and said, you can't do this in the executive branch and target your chief political opponent. That's what we just saw play out.
Well, this is.
That says good thing that crises only emerged from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. But did you notice there was a dramatic difference in how Joe Biden looked, right? He did not look nearly so pale as he did on Thursday night. And his voice was much stronger, and he did seem much more competent. Right? If this had been the Joe Biden we saw on Thursday night, then it wouldn't have transfixed the nation. I mean, he looks completely different here than he did Thursday night, and he can read from a teleprompter. Right? Very low bar. Doesn't take a lot of cognitive skills to read from a teleprompter. The way he walks still shows an obviously frail man caught in the straitjacket of his own self-defeating, unnecessary tension patterns. Looking at Matt Stoller's Twitter feed, and says, next time I don't want to do something, I'm just going to say, democracy's on the ballot. Guys, democracy's on the ballot. All right, remember, we've heard nothing but democracy's on the ballot from the Democrats over the past 5 years. And how much of a democracy was it to have this mentally frail, cognitively diminished old man, right, fading away into what appears to be something like a dementia? I mean, how exactly was that some blessing of democracy? And Joe Biden's never been popular, right? He had the privilege of running for Senate from a small state. But there's never been a time in his life where he's been nationally popular, right? He wasn't popular as a president. He wasn't popular before he was elected president. He was regarded as a moron by the Obama White House, right? He's never been popular. He's not popular now. Americans didn't want him to run. And the only way he got in 2020 was that due to COVID, he didn't have to campaign much. And Donald Trump gave the impression of a lack of competence with regard to COVID. So let's see what James Carville has to say today.
Most Democratic officials across the country. Let's bring in Democratic strategist James Carville, the former lead strategist for Bill Clinton's 1992 campaign. James, can President Biden win re-election this November?
It doesn't. That's not the real question here. The real question here is we have a Supreme Court that's bought and paid for by RVs and fishing lodges. We have a country that 72% want something different. If the Democratic Party can't produce something different that 72% of people want, then why do we exist? What are we here for? I mean, the country is clamoring for change. And what are we going to offer them? The same stuff? It doesn't make any sense, Jake. Give the people what they want. Vox populi. They want something different. Let's give it to them. I mean, I just don't get the whole thing. I'll be honest with you. I'm from Bucks, and everybody saw what they saw Thursday night. I don't take any pleasure in this. This was a year ago. I'm going to be 80 in October. You can't fight this stuff. It's just there.
So what happens? What do you think the Democrats should do?
Something different. All right. And I don't know. It'll be messy. It'll be a mess. And that's what change is. But if the Democratic Party is so committed to the status quo and so committed to sticking with something that 3/4 of the country doesn't want, then we have to say, why do we exist? What are we here for?
So, yeah, the Democrats just going after the Supreme Court, hammer and tongs. Let's get a quick recap on that.
Finding that former President Trump cannot be prosecuted for official actions taken as president, but he can for private acts. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, quote, "The president enjoys no immunity for his unofficial acts, and not everything the president does is official." In a 6-3 ruling, the court determined that some of Trump's acts alleged in the ongoing 2020 election subversion case were, in fact, official acts, but Others were remanded to the lower court for further fact-finding.
So going back to Matt Stoller's Twitter feed, right, he responds to an essay by Michael Tomasky, who writes the New York Review of Books. Barack Obama, your party and your country need you to lead here. After Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance, Democrats need Obama more than ever. Matt Stoller responds, sorry, but Obama doesn't get out of bed for less than $400,000. So having him appoint a new Democratic nominee is more than you can afford. So Nina Hartley, the elderly porn star, right? She wouldn't get out of bed to give a blowjob for less than $300. Barack Obama, the lazy former president of the United States, he doesn't get out of bed for less than $400,000. Okay, let's get some commentary here from Nate Silver, right, and Maria Konnikova.
That might be close. But like, it's not tenable to have someone who wants to be president for another 4.5 years give a performance like that, where he obviously shows his age, which is what you'd expect because he's 81, and he wants to be president until he's 86. It's not tenable to have this person continue to run for president.
So what happens when you deny reality? It takes a tremendous toll on you, right? And you start getting all these weird interfering tension patterns, right? The more you're out of touch with reality, the more you become choked by your interfering tension patterns, and they display across your face. You stop blinking. All right, you become deformed the more out of touch with reality you are. You know people who are significantly out of touch with reality, and they don't generally tend to be happy, effective people. And because they're living with so much tension, all right, when you're going up against reality, you always lose. Right? Reality doesn't lose to you. You will always lose. And all the Democrats lining up behind Joe Biden, all right, they're only going to lose. And this causes more and more tension, and they get increasingly squashed and demented by it. And they're in opposition to the vast majority of their voters, not to mention the American people. And they're putting the national security of the United States at risk. Right? We've got someone in the White House right now as president who is not capable of being president. And all the Democrats lined up behind him because that was best for their prospects.
And the principle that we should
Impartiality by whipping up panic.
What you have here is the Supreme Court imposing its judgment that that principle that we must have bold and decisive presidents is more important than the principle that we should have presidents who obey the law.
They have decreed, Trump's Supreme Court has decreed him a king.
They're supposed to be wearing these kind of black and white umpire jerseys or whatever. They look like they're wearing red jerseys or even MAGA hats. It's almost like a license to thug in a way. Like, you can do whatever you want, and the Supreme Court is probably going to let you get away with it. That is very frightening.
Meanwhile, Democrat-appointed Justice.
So why would he say license to thug? All right, it's not a phrase that would ever occur to me, but that's the milieu in which he lives. Right? Is our license to thug? Is that operating right now? Guys, our democracy is at risk. All right, democracy is on the ballot.
Democracy's death has been greatly exaggerated. Voters preferred Biden in 2020. Maybe they'll pick Trump this time. That's how the system works. By Matthew Hennessy. July 1st, 2024, 5:20 p.m. Eastern Time. In any normal election, last week's debate would have been the end of Joe Biden's long career. His performance was abysmal. Under the rules of regular political order, he'd pass the presidential baton to someone, anyone. But this isn't a normal election. Mr. Biden's opponent is Donald Trump. Regular political order is suspended. Much of the country, including most of the media and all...
You've heard that story of two men stuck in the woods and they have to outrun a killer bear that's tracking them down, but they don't have to run faster than the bear. They just have to, one of them just has to run faster than the other. And that's presidential politics. Right? You don't have to be objectively great. You just have to be a little easier for voters to say yes to than the other party.
All of the Democratic Party is convinced that a second Trump administration presents a unique threat to democracy. For this reason, he has to be stopped. even if doing so requires, well, subverting democracy. It's worth remembering that those now warning about the dangers of a second Trump presidency rejected the first one like a chimpanzee heart. Powerful members of the intelligence and law enforcement communities tried to derail Mr. Trump in 2016 and 2020, a point that democracy's defenders wave away today. Prominent Democrats from Hillary Clinton to Hakeem Jeffries outlandishly claimed Russia stole the 2016 election for Mr. Trump. The Save Democracy crowd shrugged. In calling for Mr. Biden to step aside, the New Yorker's David Remnick describes the election as a referendum on democracy itself and asserts a Trump victory would mean diminishment of liberal democracy. You might expect an explanation, a few bullet points perhaps. But liberals and progressives have been retailing this language for so long they think it explains itself. It doesn't. How could a presidential election be a referendum on democracy? The American people elected Mr. Trump in 2016. They rejected him in 2020. They may elect him again in 2024 or not. That's what democracy is. You win some, you lose some. What does it say about democracy if the people running major media outlets and one of the two major political parties don't trust the judgment of the American people? The New York Times editorial board, in its call for Mr. Biden to step aside, got closer to defining Mr. Trump's supposed threat to democracy. If he is returned to office, he has vowed to be a different kind of president, unrestrained by the checks on power built into the American political system. So Mr. Trump will do things other presidents don't do? Like foster division, prosecute his political opponents, defy the Supreme Court, and encourage lawlessness? Please, tell me more about these threats to democracy. Mr. Remnick says Mr. Trump has an undeniably authoritarian personality, whatever that means. True, he's thin-skinned, uncouth, and distractible, but Americans already know all that. They also know it was never Mr. Trump's life plan to become the standard bearer of right-wing populism. He fell into it. Don't imagine him the Machiavelli of Mar-a-Lago. He has neither the political vision nor the executive capacity to do something as ambitious as dismantling democracy. Democracy has other threats with which to contend. Where was Mr. Remnick when Chuck Schumer bellowed that Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh would pay the price if the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade? Where were the Times editorialists when Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg ran on a promise to put the likely Republican nominee for president in prison? They were nodding along, that's where. January 6, 2021, looms large in all this talk of democracy's waning days. Nothing like it ever happened before. But when Mr. Trump's supporters stormed the Capitol, the Constitution held them back. The law.
So, for how many people is January 6th a vital concern, right? January 6th has nothing to do with the lives of 99.99% of Americans. I think it was terrible. I want everyone who participated in that illegal behavior punished, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the lives of 99.999% of American people, just like what happens in Gaza, what happens in Ukraine, right? All these other focuses of the news have nothing to do with the welfare of the American people, which you would think should be the primary concern of American politicians.
Came down on everyone involved like an anvil. By contrast, when left-wing radicals took to the streets in summer 2020 and when they occupied college campuses this year, Democrats cheered them on and bailed them out. All political violence is unacceptable, but some is more unacceptable than others. When Americans use the word democracy, they don't mean only elections. They mean the whole constitutional arrangement, free speech, the separation of powers, civil rights, a free press. American democracy is liberty and justice for all, from Molly Pitcher and Thomas Jefferson to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. It's two parties, Republican and Democratic. It's government of the people, by the people and for the people. American democracy is a survivor. It has endured wars, assassinations, depressions, and terror attacks. It won't be dismantled so easily.
Very little of life runs by democracy. All right, I think it's great that we live in a democracy, but the reality is that 99.9% of life runs on authoritarian principles. And this idea that Donald Trump is a threat because he has authoritarian principles that match up with the other 99.99% of reality outside of periodic elections somehow does not frighten me.
Can, however, be used as a sharp stick. Democrats have shown themselves good at that. Anathematizing Republican presidential candidates as wannabe authoritarians has been their explicit project for.
Think about how often the news media talks about the threat of fascism, right? There hasn't been a fascist country since World War II. And yet so much attention by the mainstream media is about the threat of fascism. Trump is a fascist threat. The rise of the right in France, that's fascist, right? The right in Italy, that's fascist, right? All these names to diminish, to discredit the democratic choices of people, right? If democracy is on the ballot and the American people in 2016 wanted to vote for Donald Trump, then were our leads just A-OK with that? No. They created the Russiagate hoax, the Russiagate scandal that was the dominant story in our news media for 3 years, right? They didn't accept democracy. And when people vote in a way that they don't approve, all right, they're not accepting of democracy. They just start hurling all these names that these democratic choices are unacceptable. And they'll start talking about the dangers of majoritarian rule, right? My God, what if we lived in a country where the wishes of the majority of the people were what propelled politics?
For more than 50 years. Reagan planned to declare martial law and start a nuclear war, they said. George W. Bush signed the Patriot Act so he could spy on librarians, they said. Joe Biden told a black audience that Mitt Romney was going to put y'all back in chains. So now Mr. Trump's candidacy is more than just a bad deal for liberals and the issues they care about.
Remember when Gaza voted the wrong way in 2006? The Gazans voted for Hamas. And the United States, right, not very happy with that. They didn't respect the ballot.
It's a hair-on-fire threat to democracy itself. And Democrats wonder why Republicans yawn. The motivations of Trump supporters are still poorly understood by the political class.
So sometimes when you keep saying things, your team keeps saying things, right, you're very inclined to believe them. So many Democrats do believe, many people in the news media do believe, many of our elites do believe that democracy is on the ballot this fall. In reality, whether Joe Biden wins or Donald Trump wins or Gavin Newsom wins or Kamala Harris wins, the odds are about 99% that the lives of 99% of Americans, 99% of the time, won't be much changed depending on who's president. And our democracy will continue on no matter who is elected president.
Republicans aren't falling in behind Mr. Trump because they hate democracy. No, they like it. It's been good to them. Every 4 years, democracy allows Republicans to sidestep the biased media and permanent bureaucracy and go directly to the people. Today, as in 2016 and 2020, Red America wants to give Washington a smack. The way they'll do it is by voting for Mr. Trump. That's not a threat. That's democracy. Mr. Hennessy is the Journal's deputy editorial features editor.
Okay, pretty good op-ed there. Let's get Nate Silver, a man of the left, here with his co-host Maria Konnikova, another woman of the left. President of the United States, Joe Biden, has no clothes. Joe Biden should drop out.
Now, people are fucking stupid and stubborn, especially old people, and they may make a bad decision. But like, if you care about like defeating Donald Trump, if you care about the kind of future of the Democratic Party, and if you care about listening to like the voters who have done you the favor of telling you this for a year, that like, yeah, hey, common sense, 81 is too old to be president. He wants to be president until he's 86. I'm sorry, but like, this is kind of not that close a decision anymore, I don't think. And in some ways, like I told like I'm rambling, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I told, Gavin Newsom waved the wand and now he wins. Like, no, I think Gavin Newsom now, or Kamala Harris, has a puncher's chance, or maybe more than a puncher's chance, but just, might be below 50%, but above Biden.
Yeah. So a few things. I mean, first of all, like, yes, I think that yesterday was abysmal. I mean, I actually literally was watching at the beginning, like I do horror movies. Like sometimes when something is too grisly, like I shield my face and I don't even realize I'm doing it.
Just laughing.
You were rambling.
Okay.
You felt that way as well. But anyhow, what I was after bad, basically saying that it's
Silver
stupid
here.
that I've been hiding things.
Oh, come
All
on,
it
woman.
means, not quite, but almost handing
Come
the
on,
victory to
woman.
Trump.
She's
That was
just
just
gone
a
on
guess,
for 4
right?
minutes.
And now we have actual evidence of it, and we have evidence of Biden's polling being stagnant.
Yeah, the most devastating narratives are those confirm your worst fears. The ones that you've been told are not true.
Trump maintaining a lead after all this stuff that has happened, like Trump's criminal convictions and the economy getting quite a bit better, and voters being more focused on the race. There's also a poker thing, though, where like sometimes you have a hand where there isn't new information. However, you have more time to reflect and come to your senses, right? You can have a hand where it's like, well, why'd I call with this hand on the turn if I'm going to fold to the river on a relatively big card for me? And if you plugged it into a solver, it would say you made a mistake. Well, it's because you had more time to think about it on the river. Maybe you're a little bit tilted or something on the turn. Maybe you're distracted. Maybe you're playing poker online. You're multi-tabling, playing more than one table at once. So being able to say, look, I have thought about this more and I'm changing my mind. Certainly when there's new information, but even when there's not, is also a sign of, I think, judgment and experience and character.
Absolutely. Now, I have a question for you. So historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, I had the sense that debates didn't affect polls that much, right? That kind of the polls don't move that much in the aftermath of a debate. Do we think that that's going to change in this particular case, or do we think that this might still be the case?
So Timothy Snyder, a prestigious historian at Yale University, he says, unless Donald Trump is defeated, America ends.
The case here.
I mean, that much is relative, right? Like nothing has moved the polls more than like about a point at a time. If I had to predict, Trump was 1.5 points ahead in our national polling average, which of course national polls don't really count for very much, but
So yeah, we should be looking at Donald Trump, who's already ahead, particularly in the battleground stakes. We should see a 3-4 percentage point lead for Donald Trump coming out of this. All right, Randall Schweller, foreign relations expert who I talked about a lot about a month ago. He's got an essay in Foreign Affairs magazine, Trump the Realist, the former president understands the limits of American power. Right. And so he talks about America's dominance over the world has started to fade over the past 15 years with the rise of China, and parties that had power and then start to lose power. All right. They want to change strategies. Right. As the hegemon declines, it becomes frustrated with the existing order. Right. Many of the deals that America made at the peak of its power no longer make sense. U.S. policymakers have become increasingly frustrated with NATO. All right, NATO is no longer in America's best interests. All right, we're no longer threatened by the Soviet Union. And so Americans are turning away for commonsensical reasons from presidential candidates who embrace a muscular, interventionist, expansionist foreign policy. Right? There are profound structural reasons to demand a shift. So most people, to the extent they think about politics, think about it primarily in personal terms. I think about politics and international relations more primarily in terms of structure. Right? And the primary structures that will determine how things go are numbers, the strength of your economy, and the strength of your military. And so Donald Trump has the most restrained foreign policy of any American leader, any American president since 1945, right? He's skeptical of treaties and alliances. He prefers competition to cooperation. He's narrowly defined the national interest to exclude things such as spreading liberal values or military and humanitarian interventions. He does not view this country as on a mission from God to intervene on behalf of the mistreated abroad, right? He has shifted Washington's focus to the best interests of the American citizen and to regaining America's global power advantages, right? He's a true realist. He avoids idealistic and ideological views of global affairs in favor of mundane power politics. Now, in his first term, his realist impulses were muted. Sometimes they were stopped by his hawkish national security staffers who did not share his vision. But Trump has learned that personnel is policy. And Trump is not just on his own. The conservative movement has come up with approximately 50,000 names for people, ready to move into office when Trump moves in January of 2025. So his next administration will likely create the most restrained U.S. foreign policy in modern history. Right? And you still have many people in the Republican establishment who want an interventionist foreign policy. They want to send tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine and to Israel and to intervene all over the world, send it to Taiwan. But slowly but surely, the Trump realistic restrained camp is winning out in the Republican Party. Right? Republicans unbelievably delayed aid to Ukraine for 5 months when nobody expected that that would happen. Right? Trump realism is winning the hearts and minds of conservative voters. Right? Most Republicans believe that the United States should not take an active part in world affairs. Now, to foreign policy elites, that's terrible because intervening in foreign affairs gives them a sense of purpose, gives them a sense of status, and it creates jobs for them. Right? So if you want to advocate an interventionist foreign policy, there are a lot of jobs for you. There's a lot of status in intervening all over the world, and it's very exciting. Right? If you're the type of person who wants to go into foreign policy, all right, you're the type of person who wants to intervene all over the world. But that just so happens to be bad for America. Just like psychiatrists are heavily incentivized to exaggerate what constitutes mental illness so that they can develop more clients, more money, more prestige, and have more opportunities to prescribe medication. And people who, say, got a PhD in trauma, right, they're heavily incentivized to use trauma as the great explanatory variable for what's bothering us. And that's not true, right? That there's no necessarily correlation between the trauma that we suffer and our life results, right? That is not going to constrain people who want to make a living and earn status as proponents of the trauma explanation for reality. International relations scholars, international security scholars, they want to hype that we're in a new Cold War with China because that creates more demand for their services. Dentists want you to come in and get more regular teeth cleanings and offer more dental intervention than is in your best interests. Right? So professions do not tend to serve your best interest. Professions tend to serve their own best interest. So the United States has been spreading itself too thin, needs to sort its essential national interests from desirable ones. We don't have essential national interests in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Ukraine. All right, we probably have moderate to slightly above moderate interests in Taiwan. So we must devolve more and more responsibility to our wealthy allies. We must stop trying to be everywhere and to do everything. And Trump's realist instincts are clearly on display for as long as he's been talking about foreign policy, going back to the 1980s. And he wants to avoid new military entanglements, right? He began extracting the United States from a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. He engaged adversarial states such as China, North Korea, and Russia in ways that lessened the possibility of conflict. Right? He was the first president in 20 years who did not get us into a new war overseas. Right? Trump always pulled back from the brink of using significant military force. In his second term, Trump's realist instincts will likely find fuller expression. Right? It's not that Trump will turn Washington's back to the world. He will just realign Washington's relationship to the world with that which is in its best interest. So there are plenty of people and there are plenty of situations in life where you'll be just fine if you only interact with them moderately, right? There are people who, if you spend 4 hours with them a week on average, they will drive you nuts. But if you just spend 20 minutes a week with them, it'll be just fine. There are places that you can go that will drive you nuts if you spend more than an hour there. But 15 minutes there, you'll be just fine, right? There are situations and people that we can dial up or dial down in our life. And so Donald Trump is not turning his back on the world. He's just dialing up certain interactions and dialing down others in alignment with America's best interests, right? Surely our allies in Asia and in Europe need to pay for more of their own security. And our primary peer competitor is China. So we should concentrate on outcompeting China while minimizing the chances of a military conflict in a new Cold War, right? We need to be less dependent on foreign sources of energy. Right, greater self-sufficiency will lead to higher American job growth and economic growth and decreased energy costs for American consumers, and it will get us out of the Middle East. Right, we have bases all over the Middle East, and that's why Americans keep getting killed in the Middle East. We no longer need to maintain a significant number of U.S. troops in the Persian Gulf region as we develop our own independent resources. So Donald Trump will turn the spigots back on. So he has an impressive track record at avoiding the use of military force. He wants to compete with other countries economically rather than through the military. He thinks about world politics more in geoeconomic terms than geostrategic terms. Right? He's warned about the dangers of economic dependencies and free trade that can be exploited for geopolitical leverage. Right? The U.S. relies on foreign countries for energy, medical equipment, semiconductors, critical minerals. Right? He wants to make the United States more self-sufficient. He wants to use America's enormous power in the form of tariffs, sanctions, access to the dollar, control over global economic networks. Right? He wants to punish our enemies and reward our friends. So he's a conservative realist. He's fairly clear-headed about what should matter to the United States and what should not, and how to reduce the chances of unnecessary military confrontations. Right? He knows that we need to focus on constraining the rise of China without launching a full-blown war. And to the extent that we do get into a war, the United States will push its coalition of Indo-Pacific countries such as Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam, whose aggregate power matches that of China, to take the lead in containing Beijing because they are closer to Beijing than the United States is. Right? Russia may be militarily dangerous to Ukraine, but it's not an existential threat to the United States. Makes no sense for Washington to continue writing blank checks to Kyiv, particularly when Ukraine's European neighbors are so rich. Right? We should say to Ukraine's neighbors, if you think it's important that Ukraine is defended and subsidized, then you do it. Right? The United States should back away. Right? We're in a new world. We no longer incentivize to maintain the same kind of commitments around the world that we had during the Cold War. Back to
reasonable benchmark. 1.5 points ahead in our national polling average. If I had to predict, it might be 3 or 3.5 within a couple of weeks once the higher quality polls are fully priced in. The problem
so that's actually pretty substantial.
Yeah, and that's a wild guess. It could be 2, it could be 4. I mean, look. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
It's okay. We're tired.
The problem is that Biden is not in a position where he's ahead and just has to stem the damage, right, and let the floodwaters recede.
So it's funny. The New York Times has an article here: in a staring contest with Democratic voters, Joe Biden hasn't blinked. Notice he doesn't blink in public. Right? He didn't blink at the debate. He can appear in public for 40 minutes and he doesn't blink. And how long can he keep this up? Because the evidence seems to be overwhelming that the people don't want him. How long can Joe Biden and his team maintain this war against reality?
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marchiano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marchiano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
And today we're going to be ferreting out whatever there is to know about the topic of hookups.
So I'm under assault. I mean, Beijing is sending wave after wave of attractive Chinese women after me. All right, they are sending me messages. Oh, I like this photo. Or tell me more about this, or tell me more about that. And they're not AI bots, all right? They're conducting like a classy, high-quality conversation with me. They're trying to drain me of my secrets, right? They will confide all sorts of things in me to create a space for intimacy. And if I hadn't been doing the whole vlogging thing for 30 years, I'd probably be a lot more vulnerable to what's going on. So none of them have asked me for money. So I don't think it's necessarily the traditional pig butcher scam. So this is where you get attractive Asian women who will like your posts and you slide into their DMs or they slide into yours, but they never want to meet in person. They don't want to talk on the phone. They usually want to get to WhatsApp as soon as possible. Then they start talking about their impressive business and international jet-setting lifestyles. They want to know how much you earn. They talk about their crypto investments, and then they start pitching you highly dodgy investments. So it's called pig butchering because it's a scam that takes time, right? They develop a relationship with you. Attractive Asian women want to be your friend online. What's the catch? Right. But these profiles of attractive young Asian women, mostly Chinese, right, they're not necessarily who they say they are. And MIT Technology Review says that these are usually Chinese immigrants or Chinese people of Chinese ancestry. They try to evoke nostalgia and a desire for companionship, and pig butchering, right? Because it takes time to butcher a pig. So unlike dating sites, right, LinkedIn will often have useful information that's good for scammers. They know your earning potential based on the type of work that you list. Their main interest is to separate you from your hard-earned money, to get you into some kind of pump and dump stock scheme so that they can profit. Typical approach is to use a photo of a cute girl to get your attention. And then they all want to start chatting on WhatsApp. And I've been impressed. They speak virtually perfect English, very good grammar. They have excellent manners. They rarely make mistakes in spelling and punctuation. They are easy to talk to, right? They confide in themselves. And it's very easy to be flattered by their very close attention. But they're trying to drain me of my vital secrets. Right? It's just wave after wave of these attractive women coming at me from Japan. Man, they're trying to take my essence. I'm not averse to talking to them, but I do deny them my essence.
Okay.
Trying to take a psychological look at hookup culture.
Well, I don't know about the two of you, but I can make a good guess that we've all had clients and vicarious experience, to put it that way, of hookup culture and what people experience with hookups. What I'm aware of is that, because I live in New York City, that there, of course, is a vibrant nightlife, bar life, it goes on, and that hookups are ubiquitous.
Yeah, I've talked to these beautiful Chinese women trying to drain me, but it's important that we have our barriers. So when I text, particularly with someone I don't know, or send an email to someone I don't know, my test is, how would this look on the big posting board at Dodger Stadium, right? The billboard of Dodger Stadium. How would this text or email look? And they're just coming at me at waves. I'm only flesh and blood. I now have become renowned for my sexual discipline, but I'm only human. So I'll talk to them, but I must deny them my essence.
Amongst people in their 20s, what people have reported to me has been really overwhelmingly positive. There has been enjoyment. Sometimes it's a hookup that's disappointing or really a letdown in some way. But overall, the experience that I have been privy to is positive for males and.
So we all have our hero systems, and if you are a religious person, you have usually made a decision that you're going to put a priority on family and having children rather than on hookup culture. And so you will be strongly prejudiced to deny that there's anything good from hookup culture. It must be overwhelmingly a negative experience. And this is how a hero system can blind you to the complicated nature of reality. Now, for you to stay faithful to your spouse, right, and for you to be a good member of your religious community, this blinding may well be adaptive, right? May very well be in your best interest to not think much about the possible upside to hookup culture.
Also for females.
See, I find that so interesting. I don't know that I have as much of this in my practice, but as you're talking, what's coming up for me is that it sounds like it's this really this real celebration of sexuality for its own sake. And in ways in our culture these days, there's this sort of new Puritanism, you know? And I'm thinking, don't shoot me here, but I'm thinking, you know, some of the rhetoric around the Me Too movement is very much that any kind of transgression, and I'm not saying that rape or assault or anything like that is okay? But some of the rhetoric from the Me Too movement makes it out so that any little transgression, anything that's a little bit questionable, any crossing of the line.
So what are the big differences between the center left and the traditional hero system is fear of basic impulses, right? So there's a basic human impulse to hook up, and on the left, they understand that, but they want to discipline these impulses and make sure that you're doing it from within your own buffered identity, your own morality, your own system of meaning, and so that you can even engage in polygamy and BDSM and all these different sexual kinks, but do it in a disciplined, ethical manner, while people who are traditional, they recognize that human beings are basically selfish and not oriented in most of their impulses to their own best interests. And so it recognizes these impulses and wants to usually constrain them, and from a traditional perspective would kind of despair at notions of ethical swinging, for example.
Is to be, you know, excoriated and met with extreme fury and punitiveness. But this sounds like just a kind of almost bacchanalian enjoyment of sex for its own sake.
And it is very consensual.
Right.
It's not always, as far as I'm aware and what I can, really infer from people, but you have to leave the bar or the nightclub or wherever it is that you are and actually go to someone's apartment or a hotel or someplace. So there's plenty of time if two parties are.
So a lot of the people that I know who are young in their 20s, right, who are decent looks or above, and who do not participate in hookup culture, it's not because they're religious or particularly moral, it's because they are psychologically afraid of intimacy. And so you can comfort yourself that you don't engage in this kind of gross hookup culture because you're so moral. But if what's going on is you're really physically deformed and that you're afraid to be close and to be open and to be vulnerable with someone else, right, you maybe have to maintain that lie to yourself, but you will pay a huge price for living out of touch with reality and for maintaining blocks against connecting with other people.
Really not in agreement for one person to say, I'm out.
So, and I'm sure that there are certain personalities who can engage in hookup culture who are more robust, who are more intelligent, who are naturally more inclined towards discipline. And so I think our upper classes can often seemingly indulge in these vices with much less obvious price than the lower classes, where they will very easily completely ruin their lives with one mistake, right? They'll get someone pregnant, they'll get a disease, they'll get into some inescapable syndrome of jealousy and violence where people get killed.
Although, how do they manage expectations? Like, what if one person is thinking, oh, I really like this guy or this woman, maybe we'll become an item. Do you have a sense of how people negotiate expectations? You know, whether people assume that it's a one night or whether it might become the basis for a relationship?
In my admittedly limited.
So in my experience, whenever I've gotten into an intimate sexual relationship with someone and it's lasted more than a couple of weeks, I inevitably develop very intimate feelings for them.
Experience, it is a one night only agreement, and one person may be hoping that this is the way to sort of jumpstart a relationship, that she or he might really like this relationship to continue. But it's clear from the outset that it's going to be one night, it's going to be a sexual experience, and no one is obligated. Nobody's made any promises.
Okay, so it's just a given.
I'm surprised by the explicit contractual understanding.
So I had great confidence in my own self-discipline and that I could handle the intense emotions that came from sex, and I frequently could not. I just frequently made a fool of myself, and I lived a life that was just up and down, right? Back in my 20s, right, I could walk down the street at times and meet a woman, chat up a woman, and not that day, but I'd start dating her and go out with her and take her to bed. And so I had these tremendous highs from this promiscuous hookup lifestyle, but then I would feel jealous. I would feel sad when it didn't progress, and I'd have the crashing lows. Not everyone is cut out for this type of life.
Understanding that you're hearing from your clients in that way. I feel that what I hear is that hookups are a little bit more spontaneous than that there is more of an underlying anxiety about, will it happen? Can it happen? Will I find someone to receive me in this kind of sexual environment? And even if it's not verbalized, because I think that is bad form for people to.
So there are some forms of excitement, depending on your psychological makeup, that just become incredibly addictive, right? So probably 2/3 of the people who engage in this hookup culture can get married and settle down, but another third will get addicted to this type of excitement, and it will significantly reduce their ability to move on from hookup culture to marriage and family and a normal life, right? Instead, they will trash their reputation because of their behavior in hookup culture. They will get fired. They will lose friends. They will lose standing. They will destroy their religious and spiritual life. They will destroy their earning life, right? Their life will overall be significantly reduced because of this kind of experimentation.
Verbalize a lot of expectations going into it, particularly around the men that I work with and the young men that I work with. There is much more hope to find a love object than they would feel comfortable admitting.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That the drive, the search for the other, which might be negotiated very swiftly or initially as a sexual encounter, has a very innocent, shockingly innocent level.
So I remember when I would go to the office of porn agent Reb Sowitz, and the man who ran his office, all right, he would have Little House on the Prairie and the most wholesome TV shows going on in the background, because the filth of the porn industry would overwhelm him, and he'd want a contrast of something wholesome. And so we often try to meet our needs doing things that have no immediate relative application to what we're doing. So yeah, a lot of people participate in hookup culture who really want to settle down, get married, have kids, and be in a monogamous relationship. Other people have absolutely nothing to do with hookup culture, but they try to control their wildness playing video games or by drinking or marijuana or extreme politics, because they refuse to address their need for such physical and emotional connection.
Of secret longing.
Oh, that makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Because I think, on the one hand, I can hold this, like, isn't this great to kind of find this new place of celebration of sexuality and our bodies just in its own right. But there's this way, Joseph, when I hear you talk, that I wonder if I'm going to sound really old, if young people are using hookups as a way to kind of defend against the vulnerability of seeking an intimate.
So the less defended you are, right, the more happy, the more alive to the moment you will be. So one of the downsides of taking Alexander Technique lessons is that it kind of rips away your defenses of habitual muscular tension and compression patterns. And so you become much more transparent, right? Whatever I'm thinking and feeling, it broadcasts much more directly to you, because I've significantly reduced facial tension, tension around my voice box, shoulders, my arms, legs, ankles, due to studying the Alexander technique. And if you can also be in a place close to reality, right, you can have fewer delusions and you can have less need to defend yourself against reality. And so you're not going to be nearly as defensive. You're not going to have nearly as many barriers up between you and other people. So when you can accept the messy reality of yourself, the messy reality of other people, when you can accept the power of situation, and you impose less and less on the world and instead observe more and more of the world, right, you can steadily reduce your defenses and have a much more open and healthy relationship with yourself and with others.
An emotionally intimate connection.
Well, certainly, I think that does happen. And I think that there are plenty of people, male and female, who are entering into sexual behavior in an almost sporting fashion. But I think that is more rare than the media would report.
Right. Most people are not built to engage in sex primarily as a sport, because most people develop very intense emotional feelings and desires for emotional intimacy upon doing intimate things.
I feel on both sides that what has changed is that the courtship roles and the way or the speed with which people are entering into a sexual encounter has really changed. That it no longer takes a complicated courtship, which I think involved all kinds of things, social expectations, Freudian superego stuff, as well as, fear of chastisement.
Right. So a sanitized life, right, free of hookups, free of intimacy. It's not nearly as messy, right, but it's also considerably drained of meaning.
Or fear of being in some way marginalized.
Or fear of getting pregnant.
Or fear of getting pregnant, absolutely. We could really have a whole show on how birth control has created a sexual revolution.
Yes.
Absolutely, that's a fact.
Yeah.
So I think that people have really moved beyond these kind of set rules about how it should happen. But I think people carry their souls into every encounter. And that shows up in a lot of ways, which I don't know that they're admitting to each other. So what I'd like to suggest is...
This is a key point. People carry their souls into every encounter, not just sexual encounter. You carry your soul into your online life. You're using a fake name. You're flaming people on the other side of the world. But your soul is there with you, and it is affected, and it will then feed back into your real life. So we take our souls with us to work, to love, to church, right, to the bar, to our online life under pseudonyms. We take our soul with us everywhere.
While the contract may sound like we're going to have this robust sexual fun, and then the next day, we'll have the coffee and smooth sailing, farewell. But I think that underneath that is a whole other layer of softness and depth
and vulnerability.
And the real agreement is, I won't tell you that. I won't burden you with the secret I'm carrying in this encounter, and will agree to have a kind of...
So I find great benefit listening to things that are outside of my hero system and not feeling compelled to come up with 15 reasons why they're wrong and why my hero system is just superior to the hero systems that they are describing. But just be an observer rather than be in judgment, right? Absolutely, there are times to judge, right? You have no doubt that I think there are plenty of times that we need to make strong judgments. We have to be very careful about the type of people we allow into our life. But there's also just a time for being part of reality without judging reality.
Sporting experience together.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think there is that the agreement is there are no expectations and no obligations. And underneath that is plenty of feeling. that
You will often get to know someone much more intimately and intensely after sex than if you dated chastely for 6 months.
can have a whole huge range from let's have fun tonight to I would like to be held. I would like to experience this or that or the other thing that I hope.
I had a therapist, various therapists that told me I don't like to negotiate, but if you get into an intimate relationship, you are forced to negotiate. And some people abstain from intimate relationships not because they're so moral and so religious, they are just too stiff to negotiate intimacy. And you can't have intimacy without negotiation. You can't have intimacy without creating a space where the other party feels safe. All right, nothing good happens until people feel safe. And then you have to make compromises and negotiate the most intense and intimate things. And that requires considerable emotional intelligence and growth.
From you emotionally. So that is very much there. And people have reported to me many experiences of satisfaction. And sometimes the sort of sweet sorrow or the leave taking in the morning or later that night of
is part of the charm.
Is part of the charm that.
Right. For the mature person, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. But I know stiff, socially malformed people who can't handle the possibility of loss, and therefore they never love. They never become intimate because they just don't want to deal with the pain of rejection. And that life is obviously a malformed, reduced life compared to someone who is able to love and willing to stand on his own 2 feet even after he gets rejected by the person he loves more than anyone in the world.
It ended well or it ended badly, or he said he would call me and he didn't, or she said we could go out to dinner this weekend, but she's canceled.
Right. Who we are in love is who we really are, right? To some extent, I'm putting on a performance right now. To a great extent, where we show up for work, we're putting on a performance. We're able to just go through life without being emotionally exposed if we're not in an intimate relationship. But once you get into an intimate relationship, your defenses get ripped apart, your insecurities come out, your vulnerabilities come out, your insatiability comes out, your jealousies come out, who you really are becomes exposed, and it becomes much harder to live in delusion with regard to who you really are, because who you are in love is who you really are. And if you're not experiencing love and intimacy, you may very well be completely out of touch with who you really are.
2 weekends in a row. So there is that tender place emotionally in people and a freedom as well to explore one's body.
Yes.
Right. The most tender moments I have had have overwhelmingly been with women with whom I was in an intimate relationship. The softest, most tender, most vulnerable, most honest exchanges I had were with those women. Right. It just ripped apart my defenses, and I increasingly let go of my story, and I was able to share what was on my heart as she was able to share what was on hers.
One's partner have different experiences that at times has created some real envy in me of having been raised and come into maturity in a very different era. That these experiences are available.
So I prefer not to have the attitude, not to have the inner psychological need to tear down other people's hero systems, to be absolutely convinced that everything was better when I was young compared to now, right? I want to be flexible and free to recognize the different experiences that different people have in different situations, and how for some people, behavior that would be unthinkable for me seems to work for them, even though I can't quite jive it with my hero system.
And on the whole, positive.
It's a little bit like a kind of Aphrodite energy, isn't it? that this could just be reveled in.
And it's dangerous, right? It can shake you up. It can drive you crazy. People commit suicide. Not everyone can handle it.
Thinking specifically from the standpoint of a young woman, that she could go out into the world and just enjoy her body and enjoy being sexual and have these learning experiences. And
and the evidence is pretty clear, right? The more sexual partners a woman has, the less likely they are to be a dependable mate, right? The less likely they're going to stick around as your wife and as the mother to your kids.
Deb, I guess we're separated by about a generation, and it was
Yes.
an important generation. And I do see people that come in who are in marriages where they've been with maybe their first sexual partners. They've only ever had one sexual partner. And there can be a real feeling of kind of longing and loss about that on, their time on this planet in an incarnated body, they're not going to have the opportunity to sort of experiment and get to know themselves in that way. So there is something kind of really wonderful about it.
So most people who I know well who are still virgins, say by age 25, there is something malfunctioning in them, right? For a minority of people, they're just very impressive. They're disciplined. They have their priorities straight. But for the overwhelming majority of people I know who are still virgins at age 25, their life is shrunken. Their psychology is twisted and stiff. There's something particularly sad about their inability to connect with others. And it just doesn't show up in a lack of sex, but it shows up in an overall malformed personality.
About it, I think.
Yes, that sexuality is available.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have all of the inhibitions and societal prohibitions, religious strictures. It need not.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when people are exploring and dating and they've had kind of one hookup and some misgivings of should I or shouldn't I, and maybe I shouldn't have, and so on and so forth. But that on the whole, it's like, why not? It's kind of like almost like eating dessert, that it's not that, so I had apple.
Well, most Americans are obese, right? So most Americans would be better off not developing a taste for dessert.
Pie. Well, next weekend I had chocolate cake, and the weekend after that I had something else altogether. And that there is a world out there of physicality to be enjoyed, explored, learn how to please another person, and how you can be pleased, how the person themselves can be pleasured.
Yes. I want to say one of the things about a psychological stance is it's always both and.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about the painful side of the culture as well, which shouldn't lead to a conclusion about whether or not people should do it.
Right.
But that people feel soulfully informed by the spectrum of responses that they may have or that their partner may have. I can think of just hundreds of stories of people coming away from a hookup, feeling just deeply vulnerable, feeling that they are in fact more sensitive than they realized, or feeling pressured by their peers that they should engage in a kind of detached, even cavalier attitude.
So a common talking point among people I grew up with was that so-and-so felt things very keenly or intensely. And I quickly found out as I moved through life that everybody feels certain things very keenly and intensely when it affects them.
Around sexual connection, and that it was almost shameful for them to admit, gosh, each person that I'm sexual with kind of leaves something in my soul, does something to me, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit that to my buddies or the girlfriends, for fear that I will somehow be perceived as weak or overly sensitive, because it's almost an ideal in some areas that I should be able, or one should be able, to have a sexual encounter and walk away and have it be just sex. And that's an attitude also showing up in young married couples. This idea of the open marriage, or that it's no big deal to have sex outside of a primary life.
For very few people can sex just be sex. Sex quickly becomes something more because our souls are shaped by it.
Love relationship because it really doesn't mean anything other than the deliciousness of a sensuous experience. And I'm hearing that the people are often surprised.
Well, and I want to say something about it. I mean, first of all, obviously, if this walks into my consulting room, my primary attitude is curiosity, right? And this isn't sort of a question of landing on a kind of moral judgment about this, but it's really being.
That's one of the good things about therapy, right? Your therapist tends to be curious much more than judgmental, right? And there should be a space in your life for exploring curiosity and not making moral judgment the primary concern.
Curious about what it is for that person. But having said that, one of the interesting kind of conundrums, anthropological conundrums, is about human sexuality as opposed to sexuality among most primates. Most mammals only have intercourse, are only interested or available for intercourse when the female is in estrus, and that is often made very obvious. Animals, dogs are in heat or whatever. It's like the male knows when the female is fertile. But that it's actually incredibly occult in humans. Like most women don't really know when they're fertile. Like, why is that? So what it means is humans wind up being open and available for sex all the time, and it's clearly from a sort of evolutionarily biological perspective, it's clearly.
Yeah, in the first year of relationships, male and female desire is fairly close. But after a year into the relationship, the desire starts dramatically diverging, with men consistently desiring more sex than the women. But all of my relationships have been about a year or less. And during that time, we were usually hooking up every time we got together.
Really not meant to be only for procreation. And so, one of the theories is that it's a lot about pair bonding. So that makes perfect sense to me. And I will tell you that, along with the clients that you're mentioning, Joseph, I mean, it like, of course, having sex with somebody makes you feel differently about that person. There was this movie that came out in the 90s with Lyle Lovett called The Opposite of Sex. And he talks about, I kind of love this quote. He says that sex is like biological highlighter. That if you and I have had sex, the next time that I'm in a room, you're the first person I look for. That's, I think that's true.
There's a connection.
So it's not surprising to me that even in an encounter, like, we feel differently about that person the next day. And it's not a conscious decision. It's sort of our deep biological programming responding. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it and have it be wonderful. But I also think we're naive if we pretend that we don't have some sort of biological substrate that we're operating on top of.
I absolutely think, as you were talking also about the biological function, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that human women, are the only mammals that have orgasms, that other creatures, females, do not experience orgasms, which goes to your discussion about there's another dimension for why humans couple and why animals only couple seasonally in a certain way. That there's so much other intensity that the human body is able to experience around sexuality. And I wanted to just add, because I live in Virginia Beach, I have a fairly large, long-standing practice with military and mostly men. And I really want people to appreciate the tremendous pressure that young men experience in the military to participate in hookup culture.
Yeah, but not all men experience the same pressure equally, all right? The more at ease you are with yourself, right, the less such destructive peer pressure you're going to feel.
As a form of initiation, which I think is the old hackneyed idea that women wouldn't want to do that, but men are going to go and get these notches on their bedstands by being cavalier and detached, or focused most on the physical release or physical pleasure of sex. But I am finding, in particularly,
I noticed with a lot of men in the military, they really love their sluts and their whores.
in young military men under 30, that is very difficult for them.
Wow.
And very painful, and that the wide majority of these young military men have powerful romantic imagery in their minds. And if left up to them, most of them would not participate in hookup culture.
Wow.
And I was surprised before I started.
Yeah, so what type of person has the inner stuff where they can resist peer pressure, right? People who are at ease with themselves, have clarity on their hero system, and have a sense of efficacy, that they can direct their life. It's not that they're always the master of their life, but that they can expend effort and to see a return in exchange for their discipline.
Working with military, because I think we have a certain cultural idea about men in the military and a certain kind of sexual bravado about it. I don't find that to be true, really interestingly.
I'm thinking about your use of the word initiation, and whether the culture of the military with its sort of stereotypical macho overlay kind of forces this on young men who wouldn't necessarily choose it or aren't ready for it, versus an initiation. And what is an initiation? But an initiation that changes one somehow, that someone is ready for, that brings a person alive to himself or herself in a new way, and can leave a glow of having experienced something special, wonderful, exciting, even breaking the rules, in quotes, in some way that liberates them from an old self into a new self. I'm sure it can work both ways, but a premature initiation is a very different thing from when one is really ready for it.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. Take care.